We are excited today to have Joe Acaba with us today. He's an astronaut that has completed a couple of missions, has spent quite a bit of time, almost a whole year in space. And he is actually been selected to the moon, going to the moon on 2024. And before you guys have a chance to ask him lots of questions, and I recommend, like Raul mentioned, please send us your questions. We'd like to hear from Joe, and tell us a little bit about yourself, Joe, how you got started. Was becoming an astronaut something that you thought about from very early on? Just what has been your path to where you're at today?
All right, thanks for that introduction. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, let me see if I can. I have a very short PowerPoint. I was a former teacher, so I'll try not to bore anybody. Let me start here, and you guys can see that?
Yes, we can.
All right, so that's me when I was a kid. People were making fun of me just a few minutes ago that I used to be cute. I guess I'm not anymore, but I was born in Southern California, in Inglewood, California. Both of my parents were born and raised in Puerto Rico, and then they moved to New York, where they met each other, and then they moved out to California, where me, my brothers, and my sister were born. You know, as a kid, I enjoyed sports like most kids do. I love baseball. I still enjoy it today, and I just kept getting more and more handsome as the years went on. You know, when I was young, I really enjoyed, I love the sciences, so that was always something that I enjoyed. I really like to read science fiction books, and I think that's kind of what started me thinking about, space and how exciting it is. When I was young, my grandfather, he had these old films, which I know nobody uses anymore, but film of the Apollo astronauts walking on the moon. And so we would watch those. And I thought that was pretty exciting. So I think between reading and watching those films, it made me, think about maybe someday becoming an astronaut. But, a lot of times, life takes you in different directions. While I was in college, and I'll talk more about that, I joined the Marine Corps Reserves, not the Air Force. And that was a great experience for me while I was in college. I was at the University of California in Santa Barbara. I learned a lot while I was in the military, and I applied a lot of that to what I do today. And then before I was selected as an astronaut, like I said, I was a middle and high school teacher. So I had a little bit more hair. It was a little bit longer. So this is me just kind of relaxing on a summer vacation. So what I like to go through is some of the decisions that I made in my life that at the time people thought were really bad decisions. And I like to share these because I think a lot of you that are listening today, you're not sure what you want to do, what profession you want to have. And I think that it's definitely okay. I didn't know. But I took in high school, we had metal shop where you could learn how to weld, and we had like a lathe, so all kinds of stuff having to do with metal, and I really enjoyed that. And so I spent 4 years, every year of high school, taking metal shop as an elective. A lot of times people will tell you, hey, you should be more well-rounded, take metal shop, take wood shop, or take different electives. But I really enjoyed this, and so I just said no. I'm getting better every year, so I kept doing that. So at the time, people didn't think that was the best idea. When I was in high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to get out of high school, and I wanted to make money. And so I was going to go, maybe to a technical school, do something that I could be done with education and start making money. So, my dad made a deal with me. He said, you know what? Go to college for 1 year. If you don't like it, I'll respect your decision, and then you can do whatever you want. So at the time, again, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And there's lots of paths that you can take. Some people go to college, some may go to a technical school, and they're all okay. But at the time, people were like, man, that's not a very good decision. When I joined the Marine Corps Reserves, again, my family, they're like, what are you doing joining the military? It's dangerous. You're in school, everything is good. Why would you want to join the Marine Corps? So again, my mom and dad are just thinking, I don't know what happened to this kid. He's making all these bad choices. And then once I graduated from Santa Barbara, I went and received a master's degree, also in geology from the University of Arizona. So my background is in geology. And when I graduated, now it's been 7 years of school, I finally started to work as a geologist. It's not a millionaire job, but it was a good job. But something that's always kind of has interested me is, public service. And so I really wanted to join the United States Peace Corps. And you can see on there, it says volunteer. We all know what it means when you're a volunteer. It means you don't make money. And so my dad is like, what are you doing? I didn't leave, Puerto Rico. I didn't do all of this for you to go to college, you get a job, and now you want to quit to become a volunteer. But it was always something that I wanted to do. And so I made that decision to go ahead, and I served 2 years in the Dominican Republic. After that, I found a job managing a research center out in the Bahamas. So now, in terms of a pathway, I'm all over the place. I joined the Marine Corps, which is like this, this fighting force. Then I joined the Peace Corps, which is this more of a supportive type environment. I worked as a geologist. Now I'm out in the middle of nowhere in the Bahamas. So my point is, if you don't know what you want to do today, it's okay. And things are probably going to change over time. And then the biggest mistake I ever could make was to become a school teacher. To me, that's one of the most important jobs that are out there. But anybody who knows a school teacher, whose parents are a school teacher, you don't make a lot of money. And so my parents are like, oh my gosh, you're a volunteer, you're in the Bahamas, and now you're teaching school. So all of these bad choices that I made in my life. So how did I get to NASA? While I was teaching in 2003, NASA wanted to hire some educators to become full-time astronauts. Back in the 80s, they had the Teacher in Space program with Krista McAuliffe. She was on the Space Shuttle Challenger that had the accident, so she never made it to space. And for her, that was going to be, a teacher going to space and going back into the classroom. But for me, it was they wanted to hire some educators to become full-time astronauts and stay on board as an astronaut. So how did I get there? During my interview, which was 1 hour long at the Johnson Space Center, we probably spent 30 minutes talking about metal shop. They're like, oh, really? You were in metal shop? What did you learn how to do? And the reason why that is important is all of those mechanical skills that I learned are things that we use as astronauts, especially working on the International Space Station. So what people thought was a bad decision turned out to be okay. Joining the Marine Corps, it proved to them that I had some operational experience. A lot of astronauts are former or even current military. So I think that was very helpful. Working as a Peace Corps volunteer, it showed them that I had this international experience. Again, going to the International Space Station, we're working with the Russians, the Europeans, we got the Canadians, Japanese. So it's a very international endeavor. So working as a volunteer really was important for them to go, hey, this guy can, he can work with other cultures. And you also have to work independently. Living in the Bahamas, it was a small island out in the middle of nowhere and very similar to the International Space Station. It's this little island. that's going around the Earth. So this again showed them that I have the ability to work in an isolated environment. And then, my last final bad mistake that I think helped me become an astronaut was obviously being a teacher because they were hiring educators. But teachers are awesome. They know how to adapt. They go in with the plan, and then all of you kids go into the classroom and you mess it all up. And then they have to, redo their plan. They have to adapt to the questions that you have. So I think all of those things there really helped me to become an astronaut. So now I tell my parents all those bad decisions were all part of my master plan, and so it worked out okay. But the point is, do what you love. Every single one of these things that I did is because I really, really enjoyed it, and I worked really hard at all of them. Just a little bit, Rafaela mentioned I've been on 3 different space flight missions. The first one was STS-119 on the Space Shuttle Discovery. Going to the space station, we installed some solar panels, and it was about a 13-day mission. And then I have flown twice with the Russians on the Soyuz vehicle. So I spent a lot of time in Russia. Have to learn Russian. Astronauts today have to learn some Russian. So Expedition 31, 32, it was about 4 months long, and then 53, 54 was about a 6-month mission. And then some others that were not necessarily in space, but they're missions that I've been on. One of them is Nemo, where we live underwater. It was off the coast of Florida. And so I was down there for maybe 5 days. We did simulated spacewalks. I did a caves expedition about 1.5 years ago in Slovenia with the European Space Agency. And we do those to simulate missions like going to the space station, where you're somewhere that you're uncomfortable, you're working with an international crew, and you have to complete the mission. And then we have what it's called NOLS, the National Outdoor Leadership School. I've done that summer session, did one in the winter. I'm from Southern California. I don't like the cold. I don't know how to ski, but I had to go out there for a week on skis, cross-country skiing, building a snow cave. So again, these are things that challenged me. So I would encourage you to do things that are challenging, because that's how you grow. You make mistakes and you learn. And then I'll just throw this up there. It's not any official NASA list, but it's just these skills that I think are important, not just in being an astronaut, but in any job that you might have. So whether you want to go, in the sports, you want to be an actor, you want to be an engineer, these are just things for you to think about, while you're in school or when you start working. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but, be a good leader, be a good follower, know who you are, what you can do, be trustworthy, resourceful. So hopefully, Rafaela, you guys can capture these and share this with any students that might want this. And if there's any educators out there, I would encourage you to go through some of these with your students in your classroom so they can learn some of these skills, because it's really beneficial no matter what you end up doing. So with that, that's the end of my slideshow. Let me get rid of that like I was instructed to do. Okay, stop sharing. Okay.
Well, thank you, Joe, for that. And I will start with a couple of questions that came in as you were speaking. The very first one was, they wanted to know, what did you do as a Peace Corps volunteer?
Yeah, so I was again in the Dominican Republic, and my particular field was environmental education. And so I went out to Acampo and I lived there, and I worked with the teachers, the local community. We did reforestation projects in the mountains surrounding our campo. We did school gardens so that the students could learn about that. And one thing we always have to be careful of, it's easy to say don't chop down a tree, but when people need those trees to cook and to feed their family, you just can't tell somebody not to cut down a tree. So, we try to talk about, hey, if you're going to cut them down, let's see if we can replant them. Let's find something you can use to be more economical with the fuel that you use. So it was primarily education and then working with other volunteers in forestry and health.
Thank you for that. The other question that's coming in, and I wanted to ask you this a little bit longer because we had received questions prior to when students know that we're going to have you, they start sending us questions ahead of time, like ask him this, ask him this. So one of the school was about your education, what high school, what college that you go to. But one of the questions that just came in is, have you used your geology degree in any of your jobs?
Yeah, so why did I do geology? Like I said, I didn't know what I wanted to do. My first year in college, I was undeclared. Again, that's okay. Just, I took different classes. But as a kid, my parents would take us camping. Part of it, I think, because my dad liked being outdoors, and part it was very cheap to go camping. You don't have to pay for a hotel room. You put your tent out somewhere. So we spent a lot of time outdoors. And so that's why I started to study geology. And then I did work as a hydrogeologist for a couple of years before I did the Peace Corps. But then, even in the Peace Corps, the geology, runoff, all those things that have to do with water, those were very important in the job that I did. As an astronaut, I'm not directly using my geology. Hopefully someday, right now, you mentioned the Artemis program. I'm not assigned to a mission to go on the moon, but I'm part of that program. And I would love to someday go and walk on the moon. And of course, if we do that, they're going to need geologists to do that job. But, I think it's really important that you can get a degree in whatever you want, but it's the skills that you learn in that degree. So, today I'm not, surveying the land. I'm not, making maps, but the skills that I learned, studying to be a geologist, I use those all the time at work. How do you analyze data? How do you work with others? So I would say that while I'm not using it directly today, I'm definitely using those skills.
Yeah, I always tell students, it's also the process of being able to do some critical thinking. And like you said, analyzing, how do you put all that into place into a project that you're working on? So a lot of the times it's the degree helps you and you end up working in that field. But a lot of times it's everything else that you learn that helps you in any kind of endeavor and future careers that you may have. So that's good. The other questions that we have, and I wanted to follow up, is for all of those kids in California that are from your hometown, what high school did you go to?
So I went to Esperanza High School, which is in Anaheim, California.
And what university did you go to?
I did my undergraduate degree at the University of California in Santa Barbara. And then I went to graduate school at the University of Arizona, and both of those were studying geology. And then just a couple of years ago, after my last space flight, I went back to school and received another master's degree in education from Texas Tech University here in Texas. So you're never too old to keep learning. And so it's been fun, and you learn something new every time.
So the one question that we have is, how do we inspire our youth, our Hispanic community to start exploring, becoming innovators, and kind of approaching things with a passion? Kind of like one of, I think, the themes that you see through everything that you've done, regardless if people thought it was a mistake, which wasn't really, it was you were exploring on what you were going to do. How did you find that passion, that commitment to do a good job to bring you where you're at now?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I was very lucky to have my parents that kept pushing me. But as adults, I think we do a really good job of stifling, taking away that inspiration, that natural explorer that kids have. Every little kid that you've seen, they're looking in the grass. Oh man, what is this? They look up in the sky and they go, why is it blue? What is the moon? I mean, they're it's just natural for us to explore. And so, as an educator, you want to keep that motivation going as much as you can. As a student, don't stop asking questions. I would say challenge yourself. So I was lucky that, my parents, for them, an education was extremely important. And so, sometimes the motivation that my dad gave me was not always, the best, but he always was looking out for me, and, he knew the value of an education. So I think that we need to inspire students to want to continue to learn, to continue to explore, and not have them be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. We were talking earlier before this started, and I made a mistake in a spacewalk, like the most important time in my life. And I have made mistakes, and they were very painful at the moment, but you learn from those. And if all you do is safe things, you're just, you're not going to be as fulfilled. So, and then for those of us as Latinos, I think it is, our responsibility to do a good job at what we do, no matter what it is, because we are a role model to somebody, and we can't forget that.
Thank you for that. And one of the questions that we have is, you mentioned the mistake you made. What do you do, or how have you overcome disappointment? What do you do to continue going and getting motivated or remotivated or focused to continue and not let that stop you from what you're hoping to achieve?
Yeah, it's not easy. Mistakes, like I said, can be very painful. You sit there and you think about, oh my goodness, why did I do that? And so what I tell people, especially when I'm doing a spacewalk, or if you're a pitcher in baseball and you throw a pitch and somebody hits a home run, okay, I made that mistake, but guess what? The next batter is coming up. And if you focus on that mistake, you're not going to be able to do the task at hand. When I'm doing a spacewalk, if you make a mistake and that's all you think about, you're just going to make more. So I would say, when you make that mistake, depending on when it is, if you have time at that moment to analyze it and learn from it at that point, go ahead and do that. But if you're somewhere that, hey, something else is coming right after this, take that, put it somewhere else. Don't forget it, because there's, value to what you just learned, but then move on and then come back and reflect on that. Once the mistake is made, you can't change that. So don't think about all the things, like, oh my goodness, why did I do that? But just go, hey, how can I avoid that in the future? So it's never fun, but I think for anybody who has been successful, everybody has a list of mistakes that they have made in their life. And, that should be a motivation to you, that you are pushing yourself beyond what you think you can do.
Yeah, because I think that the person, if they're very cautious and they don't ever kind of extend themselves, they might not make mistakes, but they're never going to learn or move themselves any further than their comfort zone. So you make mistakes sometimes, but all you're doing is challenging yourself, and hopefully it's going to make you better in the future.
Yeah, I think many people have more potential than they think. I think all of us do. It's and you don't know what your potential is until you try things that are different.
Yes, I agree with you. Joe, the other one, another question that we have is, how did it feel like to be in space the first time?
Going to space is awesome, and I hope everybody who's listening today has an opportunity to go. On my 3 different missions, every time I get there, it's just incredible. But the first one was really special because it's my first time going, and we were a crew of 7 on the space shuttle. And so for about a year and a half, we trained together almost every day. We were a very tight group. My crew members almost became like family because you really get to know each other. And so on that, that launch day, Swanee sitting next to me, he had gone before. We're looking at each other. I'm getting support from him. And we're like little kids at an amusement park. We're just like, we are excited. And then when those engines light, things start to shake, and that it's really going to happen. because in space flight, sometimes the launch is scrubbed and it doesn't happen. But once those engines light, you know you're going, and it takes about 8.5 minutes to go from 0 miles an hour on Earth to 17,500 miles per hour up in space. So in 8.5 minutes, you go from Florida to going around space. So that ride, you can imagine, it's pretty powerful, and it's just super exciting. And then the best part is once you get into space, all of your books, your pencils, if they weren't tied down, they start to float up, and you're like, wow, I really am in space. And you can't train for that a whole lot on Earth. So that's this, wonderful experience. Then you get out of your seat and now you're floating. But then the best part is when you look out the window and you see planet Earth 200 miles away, that's when it's all real, and it's pretty cool. So floating is awesome. The view is awesome. It's just a great place to live and work.
Thank you for that. We have a question. One of the students wants to know, is there a different smell or sound when you're in space?
A different what?
Smell. Do you smell?
Smell?
Yeah, and sounds when you're in space.
I don't know if they're different. For me, every time I go to the space station, I'll never forget that smell. And I say it smells terrible. Other astronauts like, no, it's not bad. But for me, it's this very unique smell that it's not quite like a locker room, but you can imagine, the space station has been there for 20 years. We have to clean it every weekend. We have to wipe it down. We have to vacuum it, but there's just 20 years of people living there. So that's a very unique smell. And then when you get done from a spacewalk, all of the material, the metals, your clothing, they off gas. Some of the gases come out of the material. So again, that's a very unique smell. But it's not that my smell has changed. You just are in tune to that very unique smell that you just don't have here on Earth. And then when it comes to taste, again, everybody's different, which is why we keep studying, humans in space, because for some people, their taste buds do change a little bit, and they feel like food is not as spicy as it is here on Earth, so they're always putting Tabasco on something. And for me, it just it wasn't like things changed. It's just in a different environment.
Okay, thank you. So we have a student that wants to know, since when you're in space and we don't have gravity, how do you exercise? How do you take a shower? There's several questions that they have a curiosity. How do you live in space?
Yeah, living in space is great, but it has a lot of challenges. Exercise is one that if you go to space for 6 months at a time and you don't exercise, your muscles will start to atrophy. They will, become weaker because you're not walking like we do every day. The same with just overall exercise, your bone density. It gets smaller while you're in space if you don't exercise. So every day we spend about 2.5 hours exercising. We have a stationary bike, so it looks very similar to a bike that you would have here on Earth, where you clip your feet in. You don't need a seat because you're not sitting down, so you're kind of just, your butt's floating and you're pedaling, and it has a resistance on there, so you get a really good workout. We have a treadmill, and you're like, well, how do you use a treadmill in space if you're floating? And so we have a harness that we wear, and then at the bottom of the harness are like some bungee cords that are very, very stiff that we hook to the sides of where you run. And so it's pulling you onto the treadmill, and then you start it up and then you run, and depending on, how much tension you have is how hard it feels. But it is like, it feels like you're running on Earth. So both of those are important for your cardiovascular and, the bones. And then we have a resistive exercise device. And that one is you are pushing kind of against a vacuum. And so it feels like you're lifting weights, but you're not. And so we do that as well to exercise your legs, you're doing squats, all the different exercises that you might do here. So we have to do that. Let me see what else. Living in space, sleeping in space is cool, because there's really no up and down. So you sleep in a sleeping bag so that you don't just float away in the middle of the night while you're trying to sleep, and your arms are floating. Some people like to be pulled against the wall. Some people just let their bag float around their crew quarters. But when you look at the space station, somebody's on the floor, you have one person on each side and somebody on the ceiling. But for all of us, it feels exactly the same. You don't know if you're, on the floor or not. So that's very, very comfortable. The big one that if I'm in front of students, they always want to know how you go to the bathroom in space. It's very, very challenging. You need to have time because nothing is easy. And so if you're going number one, which most students know what that means, if you're urinating, you urinate into a funnel, and that funnel is, it's onto a tube, and there's just a little bit of suction, not like a vacuum cleaner, just a little bit that takes that urine, it processes it all, and then we end up drinking that. And usually when I tell kids that, they are like disgusted. But it is an engineering marvel, and of course we test the water, it's very good. But it's kind of weird that you're drinking, your pee from a couple of days ago. And then when you got to go number two, that's also challenging because things, again, they float. And so we do have a toilet, and there's a bag, and the bottom of the bag has some small holes. And again, there's a little bit of suction there. So when you do that, it kind of almost falls into the bag because of that suction. Then, you close it up and you put it into a metal container, and then we end up sending that back on a cargo vehicle that then burns up in the atmosphere. So lots of challenges of working in space. If I have my pen, if I don't have Velcro on it and stick it somewhere, it's just going to float away. And then you're like, oh, where's my pen? Where's my wrench? And it's very easy to lose things. So that's frustrating when you first get there. But it's also very cool that if, we were in my house and I had people, there'd be somebody on the ceiling, somebody's upside down. It just doesn't matter. And so when you have to work on something, you just naturally will orient your body to whatever makes sense to do that job. So some things are really, really hard, and some things are just much easier being in space.
That's great. And yeah, you're right. When a lot of the times when the kids hear about the fact that you drink your urine afterwards, after they've re-cleaned the water, they're like, yuck, I can't believe you do that. But it's also, you can reuse, and the weight and all that on the shuttles, you guys are very careful to make sure that all that is maintained so you guys can function when you're up there. I have a question from, actually, it's one of the high schools where we have one of our robotics teams, Sunset High School here in Dallas, and the student wants to know, what kind of metal did you work on when you were taking the metal shop classes?
Yeah, when I look back to that class, that teacher, Mr. Walters, was crazy because he had 30 students in a classroom or more. And like I said, we had, we learned how to weld, gas welding, arc welding. We had a location where we would, no kidding, melt aluminum and make a mold. And so here you have molten metal, and you're trusting these, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds. You have a lathe that is spinning super fast that if you mess that up, you're really going to get hurt. We had band saws. So all these things that a parent would go, I don't want my kid to touch that. So the types of metals, it varied depending on, on what you were doing. But as I reflect back on that time, he challenged us every day. It was a dangerous environment, but he trusted us and he challenged us. He taught us how to be responsible. And that's why I think the skills I learned there were probably some of the most important in my life. And it's something that, for educators, it's always easy to do the same thing with your students. But again, you need to challenge them. And that's what he did every day. So he was crazy. And I tell him that still today when I talk to him, that, man, you were crazy letting us do that. And I've been a school teacher, so I can only imagine the stress that he was under every single day, just going, I hope this kid doesn't chop his fingers off today. I hope he doesn't, burn a hole in his foot. It was pretty exciting.
That's great. But I think those are the teachers that are really exciting and challenge the students and really help you achieve and be creative. So that's great. I have another question from a student. He wants to know, when you come back to Earth from after being in space, do you drop things? Do you find yourself dropping things in Earth?
Yeah, it's always interesting, going to space and coming back. And again, everybody is different. Everybody's body is different. So like for me, when I first get back from space, everything just feels like really heavy. And you're like, how do we live on this planet? Your head feels heavy, your arms. And then for me, if I move my head quick, I just feel like I'm spinning and I want to get sick. So for me, the first like 24 hours, if I were to stand up and try to walk, I could do it, but my stomach just didn't like it. And I would get sick or get really close to being sick. But then if I laid down, everything was okay. For me personally, I've heard of people that, they get back and they're drinking water at a party when they get back from space, and they just let it go because they're used to doing that in space. So I never did that, but a lot of my fellow astronauts have said they have done that, or even getting out of bed, they forget where they are, and, they fall out of bed because you just spend so much time in this environment that it's just easy to forget because, again, going from Earth to space is that, 8.5 minutes. So now everything is floating. But when you come back home, again, it's very quick. You're in space, and next thing you know, now you're living somewhere where you feel the force of gravity. And it does take your brain a little bit of time to remember where it is. But the human body is pretty amazing on how it adapts.
That's great. And I know that they study the human body every time you go in space, especially when you go for a few days versus when you go for the long periods of time, like 6 months before you come back. So thank you for answering the question for our students. I have two questions that I'm going to put together because they're kind of same topic. One of the students wanted to know, how old were you when you were selected as an astronaut? And another student wants to know, how were you selected? What was the process for you being selected as an astronaut?
Yeah, so how old? I was in my 30s. I got selected in 2004. I was born in 1967, so I'll let them do that math, but somewhere in my 30s. And, we've had astronauts that have come in as young as their kind of mid to late 20s. And then we've had some that have been hired that are in their 40s. And so it's always this balance because you want somebody who's healthy. So that's a big part of it. But then you also want somebody who has experience. You don't necessarily want somebody who has never, had a responsible job and all of that. So that's why you find this range of astronauts when they first get selected, to make sure that they're healthy enough to become an astronaut, but also that they have enough experience. When I was selected, again, I was teaching school. Somebody told me about it, that NASA wanted to hire teachers. So I went on the internet and I looked at the job description, and it just, like any other government job, I had to fill out an application. They probably had a couple of prompts, like, tell us why you want to become an astronaut. What would you do as a teacher in space? And so I did all of that. I submitted it, and then slowly NASA would respond and say, hey, we want you to go see an eye doctor. We want you to go see, a flight surgeon. And so that you're still kind of in the running, which was cool because you're always waiting for that letter that said, sorry, we didn't accept you. So when they want more information, that's really, really good. And of course, I'm sharing all of this with my students, so they're excited, because they knew that I applied. And so I would get something, hey, this is what I'm going to go do next. So I think it was very exciting for them. And then back when I was selected, we would come to the Johnson Space Center, where I'm at now in Houston, and we would have 1 week of, we called it an interview week, and there would be about 20 individuals, and then they had different weeks where people came in. So they interviewed 99 people for my class out of all of the thousands of applications. And so during that week, lots of medical exams. NASA, they don't leave any stone unturned. They look at everything in your body because, again, you want people that are healthy that go to space so they don't have an issue while they're up there, which would be really bad. So a lot of medical exams. They looked at your proficiency to fly the robotic arm. So they just had some kind of computer games. I tell kids today, you guys will be great astronauts, flying a robotic arm, because it's like playing a video game. It's just real, but your ability to use both of your hands, I can't play some of these video games because they're, going up, down, turning to the right, left, they're shooting, they're kicking. But kids today can do that. So for me, I had to learn how to do that. And then we also had a 1 hour interview that I kind of talked about before. So you had all of that crammed into a week. And then from there, they made their selection, of our class. And, that, of course, was an exciting moment when you get that phone call. And I was in my classroom when Colonel Cabana called me and said, hey, we want you to, come to NASA and join the astronaut corps. So, that was pretty cool. And so nowadays the process is, fairly similar, but they may have two different trips. Like one trip is just medical. And if all of that goes well, then they bring you back for another week of testing and interviews.
Thank you. I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to try to keep in mind of what we have going on. But one of the questions that we also have is, do you have to become a pilot when you are selected as an astronaut?
Yeah, good question. You don't need to be a pilot when you get selected. The first set of astronauts, if you ever watched The Right Stuff, they were all pilots. So you don't need to be a pilot, but it's helpful. They like to see that in people that apply. I was not, but we all have to learn how to fly a plane. We fly the T-38, and so I sit in the back seat, so I always have a pilot in the front, but I have to talk on the radio, do the navigation. We can fly from the back seat, so we do that. And that's why, this suit, I'll be flying tomorrow. This is what we wear when we fly in case there's a fire. It's a Nomex material, but it's kind of become the symbol of the astronaut because we're always flying and going places. So you don't need to become one, but you will learn to a certain level how to fly when you get selected.
And another question we have is, how long after you were selected as an astronaut, how long was your training?
Yeah, the training is long. If you think school is long, training to be an astronaut is pretty long. So when you first get hired, they call you an astronaut candidate. And it's about 18 months to 2 years where you're learning, what I would call basic astronaut stuff. How does the space station work? How do you fly the robotic arm? How do you do a spacewalk? You have to take Russian language class. So there's just a lot of training that takes, about that amount of time. And then once you pass that, then you're eligible to be assigned to a mission. And then once you're assigned to a flight, then it's about another 2 years where, you may travel to Russia to learn about that vehicle. You learn about the specific things that you might do. So if you're a super lucky astronaut, you might get hired and fly within 4 years, but that's about as quick as it can be. So it takes a while. And just like anything we were talking about, if you really, really love it, it doesn't seem like work. They were paying me to learn how to speak Russian. They're paying me how to learn how to do a spacewalk. So it was like every day was super fun. So that's why I tell people, don't worry about money. Don't worry, do what you like, and you're really going to do well at it.
Yeah, that's really great. I agree. That's something that Sarah always tries to tell the students is, and actually with all of the people that we work with, find something that you really enjoy doing, because it makes your job that much more enjoyable, and hopefully the money will come later. But do what you like and not necessarily always think about the money. The other question that I have, and we had talked a little bit earlier, one of the students asked, does your digestive system change when you're not in gravity? And then another student asked, what does the food look like when you're in space?
Yeah, great questions. Your digestive system, it does change a little bit, but people are like, well, how do you eat? How do you swallow if everything is floating? Your throat, it takes it down, into your stomach, everything digests, but you have to get used to a different type of food. So we know in space, everything kind of floats. And so everything's in a bag. It's either in a bag or a can. So that takes a little bit of getting used to. Your water, your coffee, all of that is in a bag. If you're having chicken, it's in a bag, and it's all kind of saucy so that it doesn't, just float away. We don't eat bread because of the crumbs would go everywhere. So we eat a lot of tortillas, which, I love that. So that was not a problem for me. But your system does change, because every now and then we would get a capsule that might bring up fresh fruit. And when I would eat that after eating the space food for so long, my body didn't like that a whole lot. So it changes, and the menu, it kind of recurs every few weeks. So there's a variety of food, but over 6 months, you're eating the same thing quite a few times. And let me see if I can share this fun video, if it works. If it doesn't, we'll move on. Let's see. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
And so, can you hear me as well?
Yes, we can, Joe.
All right. So, we had an Italian astronaut up there with us. So this is us making pizza one day on the space station. It's not something we had every day, but it was kind of a special treat because we had Paolo with us. And so we all got to make our little personal pan pizza. So, astronauts are like big kids too. We like to play with our food. You use the scissors to cut up the food. The spaghetti sauce is kind of like the glue that keeps everything together. So you can see the Russians made a purely meat pepperoni pizza. And, here comes the Italian who made a more refined type of pizza. But that's us on a Saturday night on the space station.
So what kind of pizza did you make?
I kind of had a combination. I put as many meats as I could find, but I tried to put whatever vegetables were out there as well. So I like a little bit of both.
We have a question. They want to know, what is one of your unique memories, or I guess it could be your special memory that you have from space?
Man, I have a lot of special memories. A couple of them is I like to get up early. I'm just an early morning person. And so I would get up a lot of days, and I would be the first person awake on the space station. So it would be dark and it would be quiet. And just coming out in the morning and floating across the US lab just never, was always a special moment for me every day that I woke up. Looking out the window, like I said, is great, and probably one of the coolest things. And there's a lot of pictures out there of the northern and the southern lights. And so if it's the right time of year and you're at the right spot, it's just incredible. The greens, the reds, and they look like it's covering, the whole planet, your whole field of view. And you try to take pictures of it, and it never looks as good as it does, as you're, kind of going over it. But those were always, pretty special moments. I really enjoyed looking at the Nile River. It looked like a necklace going through Africa, because you could see where all the people are living, and, that was pretty cool. And then something else that's pretty special is once a week, you would have a video conference with your family. So it was kind of nice because, you're in space and you're just talking, your mom, abuelita, what's going on. And so sharing that with them was always, really special.
That's great. I have a question from a student that wants to know which shuttle did you prefer to go in, the Russian vehicle or the space shuttle?
You know, they're just different. I can't say that one is better than the other. I'm happy that they both got me back safe and alive. The space shuttle, of course, you know, very historical part, you know, of American history, but the space shuttle was very, very complicated. A lot of things had to go. I mean, every time you go to space, a lot of things have to go right, but the space shuttle was super complicated, and it was built to be like a pickup truck to take things up to space to build the space station, where the Russian Soyuz vehicle is more like a sports car. It's just there to get the people from space to the space station with maybe a little bit of cargo. So, you know, they were completely different. The space shuttle was kind of nice because when you land, you know, like you are a glider. And so it's very civilized, and, you know, you just, you go and you touch the ground. Where on the Russian Soyuz, when you land, you're underneath a parachute. And when you hit the ground, boom, you know, you hit the ground. It's not as subtle. And so they were just totally different. And I can't say I liked one better than the other.
We have lots and lots of questions coming up all the time. We have one from a student that says, you know, how many sunsets and sunrises did you see when you were in the mission?
A lot. And so I will challenge that student that, so when you go around the earth at the speed that we're going, you have, the sun will come up, and then 45 minutes later, about more or less, you know, you will have a sunset, and then it'll be dark for 45 minutes. So, you know, every 90 minutes, you get one sunset and one sunrise. So if you take 90 minutes, divide it or multiply it, I don't know what it is, with 306 days in space, you can probably get that answer, but it's a lot. And so it's cool because, you know, every 45 minutes, the sun's coming up or the sun's going down.
That's great. That's a good question for the math students, and for when we have our community day, we'll be sure to ask them that at that point. Another comment that someone made, or question they want to know, when you were on the crew for 119, President Obama called the crew. So how did it feel to get that call?
It felt great. It was a very cool moment, and, you know, we have video of that. You know, two things that stick out in my mind is Sandy Magnus is an astronaut, and at the time she was on the space station, and we were bringing her back, and she had, you know, long hair, and her hair was floating everywhere, and she's in front of me, and I'm like, hey, be cool, you know, I mean, you're getting in my view, because her hair was going all over the place. And then, you know, that was also after my first spacewalk that, you know, where I had made some mistakes, and so, you know, I'm in this kind of focus mode on the next one. So it was kind of this cool experience, but it's in the middle of, you know, kind of a serious operation. So I kind of remember both of those, and he was, you know, super nice. And he said, hey, when you guys get back, come and visit me at the White House. So of course we took him up on that, and we did a nice visit to the White House when we got back and had a chance to meet him. So it was a great experience.
That's great. I'm going to ask you those two more questions, and then I'll ask you your last question so you can share some comments with a student. One of the students wants to know, how long does it take to get to space? And then another student wants to know, how close have you been to a black hole?
All right. So, yeah, getting to space is, you know, again, it's pretty short. It takes you, you know, about 8.5 minutes just to get into space. But at that point, you're maybe only, you know, 60 miles or so, you know, above Earth. But then to get to the space station, it could take you, on the space shuttle, took us a couple of days, because then you raise your orbit, your altitude to get higher. And then some really smart people, they figure out when to burn your engines to help lift you up, so that, you know, the space station is going around at 17,500 miles an hour. You're going around fast, and somehow those two things have to meet. And so that is not easy to do. How close have I been to a black hole? Not very close. When you think about the space station, if this is Earth right here, the space station is like right it's really, really close to Earth. So, for people that are here in Texas, 200 miles might be from, I don't know, is that Dallas to maybe to Houston or something like that. So it's not, super far away. And, the black holes are obviously much, much farther away. Luckily.
Yes, not that close, but a little bit closer than for those of us that are in Earth. So I would like to ask you, Joe, we are getting lots of questions, too many to ask you in the time that we have allocated. I want to ask you if it's possible for us to email you those questions, and if you don't mind answering them, and then we can respond to the students so they don't feel like we didn't have time for their questions or their comments, because we had questions from everywhere from California, New Jersey, Texas, Houston, all over. The last question that I will ask is, one individual wanted to know if you're recognized when you're out shopping or something as an astronaut. And then the very end would be any kind of advice or kind of motivation that you would like to share with all of our students that are joining us today. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. It is really, really great that our students can see role models that have not had everything planned from the very beginning, but because they did the best that they could in everything that they tried, they're able to achieve greatness. And we love to have you as a role model for our community. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And so the first question, sorry we couldn't get through all of the questions, but you have John's email address, mine, and I will do my best to, it might take me a little bit of time because we're busy, but I would love to do that. And hopefully I can meet a lot of you in person once things become a little bit more normal. So am I noticed when I go outside? No. Like if I'm wearing this, they might go, oh, maybe he's an astronaut. But here in Houston, we have a lot of chemical factories. And so people wear a very similar blue suit. So I'm sure a lot of people just think when I wear this that I'm working at one of the chemical plants. So if I'm at work at the Johnson Space Center, people know who we are. But outside of that, not really. If it's interesting, when I go to Puerto Rico and I'm on the news there because I'm, giving talks, that's probably the one place where if I'm out at dinner, people will recognize me. Hey, can we get a picture? And, can you sign this? So it's kind of nice that people don't know who I am, because I can go and I can give a talk and people can be very excited about it. But then, I can just, go back to my normal clothes and live, a normal life. So it's a great balance. And then just, in terms of, just words to share with people, we talked a lot about really doing what you love. What I tell students is that you don't need to be the smartest person out there. There's always going to be somebody smarter than you. That's just, I don't care how smart you are, but there's no reason why you can't work harder than somebody who's next to you. So, find what you love and work really, really hard. When I first got here, I went from being a teacher to then I was a student, and I had to learn a lot of different things. And I had to work really, really hard. And I was definitely not the smartest person that they hired. But I wasn't going to let somebody study more than me. Even though my score might not be as good, I was going to work as hard as I could. So challenge yourself. Don't be afraid to make mistakes and just work really hard. But you have to have fun while you're doing it.
Again, thank you so much, Joe, for being with us. And Raul, we turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Rafaela. Thank you, Joe. Excellent presentation. And yes, we have many questions and also comments. Mr. Gonzalez from Brownsville says hello and that you guys met. Ms. Wilkinson from Inglewood saying listening and are proud of you from Inglewood. Dr. Jampiel de Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, también dice hello. We have students from Puerto Rico, from San Germán, saying hello. So there's from everywhere, New Jersey, we have from a lot of places, folks joining, and thank you for joining today for this event.